Just when I thought a story would be fun, would only be fun, it then gets really, really asinine. And honestly, I should have learned my lesson by now to never underestimate the ability for a fun story to become very, very asinine. This is a Steelers live chat edition of Mic Drop, or at least maybe a live chat edition of Mic Drop. Either way, I got some things I got to touch on here around the Steelers universe. Steelers were in the news this past week, and it was a bit asinine to say the least. So again, this is a Steelers edition here of Mic Drop on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and of course, SteelersNow.com. I am your host, Mike Asti, and this one is going to be about, well, Ben Roethlisberger getting a haircut or finally getting a trim, and my thoughts on the Rooney Rule, and changes that were made, and changes that weren't, and my thoughts there on what was positive and what wasn't in terms of what has been done now with the Rooney Rule. So that kicks us off here with what's asinine, because I always prefer what's asinine in terms of what I'm covering in the sports world. Kind of been surrounded by the term asinine most of my career. I think many take the term asinine and it's synonymous with me. So why not kick things off here with Ben Roethlisberger's haircut? So Ben put out a statement, put out a video even, way back, almost a year ago, when he got injured, and it led us into the season of backup quarterbacks. It led us into the season that was Mason Rudolph, Duck Hodges, and we all know the end result there, and I've touched on that on past shows as well. But he is now officially back. He is now going to be the starter next season. Who knows how long that'll be in terms of his career? 1, 2 years? We don't know. I doubt it'll be forever. I doubt it'll be 40-plus years old like Brady and Breeze. But we got him for at least next year. Got him probably for the year after that based on the contract. And you'd figure that's going to be a higher level of production than what Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges were able to do. You figure that at that higher level of production may actually get the Steelers in the postseason, especially with that extra playoff spot that if available last year or even the year prior with the Antonio Brown drama, they would have actually freaking got in. Mike Tomlin never would have missed a season in the postseason in his career. And while a couple years ago Ben threw too many interceptions and made a little bit too many mistakes and wasn't as efficient as you would like him to be, a lot of that also could be improved. I thought it was going to be improved last year without AB and trying to force the ball to him, so he does need to make some adjustments. But the first step in that is getting back on the field, throwing the football, getting some continuity and in sync with those receivers, in particular the guy that I'll admit I've harped on a lot and put a lot of pressure on, and many others have as well, and Juju Smith-Schuster, who we talked about all through the draft and touched on it throughout this channel and on Steelers Now, throughout several shows, that Juju has tons of pressure on him. He needs to step up, and he may have the most pressure on him over any other NFL player coming into this season. I would say Juju and James Conner, two offensive weapons for Ben. They have the most pressure on them of any other players coming into this NFL season. I'll definitely say that. And maybe the Bucs' offensive threats with Brady just to step up with him. But Juju and Conner got pressure. They need to play better. They can say injuries, they can say Ben not being in there, but the excuses eventually will die out. And Juju had a bad season. Yes, he was hurt. Yes, there was backup quarterbacks, but his separation wasn't even there where Deontay Johnson's was, a rookie. So he didn't have a good year. But now he'll have that Hall of Fame quarterback back again. He'll clearly have somebody better throwing him the football. And that'll maybe give him a year to bounce back and prove me wrong and say, okay, he can be a number one receiver even though he's yet to prove it yet. And his great numbers were as number two. That's big. And that's involved with Ben coming back. And that's involved with Ben being there or not. That certainly could help Juju. Could help the team who couldn't move the ball towards the end of the season. And even if Ben makes mistakes, he's going to move the football for you. That's always been something he could do throughout his career, even to start things off before he was really elite. But again, that all starts off with getting that continuity, getting that chemistry with receivers, getting back on the field, and Ben finally is able to get back on the field. It's not just a conversation. It's not just Kevin Colbert saying he's going to be there and going to be the starter. He got back on the field. He threw with the receivers. He threw with Juju. He tossed the football, and he said before that once he started tossing the pigskin around to NFL receivers throwing a legit NFL pass, as he put it, He would trim his beard. He would shave his beard. It no longer would be the lumberjack there, the bionic lumberjack that was on the sidelines that our Ed Thompson shot those pictures for us on Steelers Now. And those are great, too. Those are going to live in infamy around the Steelers parts. And Ben lived up to his end of the bargain. He certainly did. He, as I will tell all of you here who are with me on the chat, he got a haircut. I can't even say it's a haircut, really, though. It was kind of disappointing. It wasn't like he shaved the whole thing off. It was a trim, but he got a trim. And that was fine for a few hours until our great governor, Governor Tom Wolf, and I'm not trying to make this a political show by any means, but he put his nose into Steelers business. He put his nose into sports business. And yes, I can kind of get why he maybe would have been upset, and this was a question that was asked him. It's not like he said it out of nowhere, to be fair to him. But as you see here on SteelersNow.com, Governor Wolf became critical of Big Ben. He made it clear that Big Ben is not above anybody else, that if you and I can't go get a haircut, then I will show myself again, because clearly I don't need a haircut. I do keep the pretty short or shaved head look. I've done it for years. I think I can pull it off. I have a set of blades at home, so I am fine. But regardless, he doesn't want anyone to get a haircut. Okay, he's not a fan of the haircuts because obviously that takes away from social distancing. Obviously, someone's going to be touching your face, which is one of those hot button-ish areas you don't want to be having anyone touching, even if you go out in the public. Just don't touch your face. You would be having someone touch your face, touching your hair. That's not going to work in terms of social distancing, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of COVID-19 and trying to be safe. So he was critical because Ben went to a barber. He went to somebody he knows that is a close personal friend who claims and later put out that he did him a favor as a personal favor. I get it. And who knows whether he got paid or not, or whether it was just a favor that he did for free. But that was something that Ben said he was going to do, and Governor Wolf didn't like. Because nobody else can get a haircut. Many of you may be shaggy as hell. I know Alan Saunders was rocking that lumberjack beard for a while. You guys can see him looking like that over on those draft shows there on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. But again, Ben went to get a haircut, and Governor Wolf didn't like it. Now, guys, this isn't going to need me to go on a long rant for this one. I'm going to spare you of that, as this is not going to be a long program. These takes are going to be pretty succinct, and they're already out there by others. I already put them on Twitter, but I just had to get them here and make this clear. I kind of can get the statement that Ben's not better than anybody else, and there's already been conversation with the NBA coming back, or Major League Baseball, and all these different proposals, that they want to make it sure that these players aren't receiving testing and special measures that the public can't even get. Because there are people who can't get tested, but now all these players are going to get tested every single day with different tests each time. That's blowing a lot of tests that maybe the public needs. I get you don't want to have the athlete above the average person, even though they're generating more money, but they're getting paid more money than the average person. So I get you don't want to set them on this precedent that all we care about is them and the average person working 9 to 5. We just don't care whether they live or die. And, that may be literally the case in some instances, unfortunately, but they don't want to make that the situation. They don't want to put that PR spin out there. Adam Silver has basically said that. I get it. But I think he also went way too far and made this into a gigantic deal that it didn't need to be. It's one thing to answer a question. It's one thing to say that, well, maybe Ben shouldn't have done that. He's not above anybody else, and that goes against social distancing. But to continuously dig the needle in, to reiterate that comment, to make it clear and say the word, I'm being critical and Ben's not above anybody else. I get it. I would have much rather had him just kind of backpedal and say, well, that was against social distancing, but they had a one-on-one connection. They were trying to be as safe as they could. Any of that, I don't know. But my point is, I can get where the governor is coming from. I can, to be fair, despite having some strong tweets against this. And I even had a former press secretary of the governor come back at me on this. I get it. And maybe to say he was harsh or offering a tongue lashing might be severe. But let me put it to you this way. Ben and the Steelers, to be fair, and I'm somebody with a press pass here, so I'm taking a risk kind of saying the Steelers did something wrong. I'm not going to do anything that's not true. I'm not going to be scared to say the truth, even with the press pass there on the line. So I'm not going to be one of those media members that has a press pass and just always going to sing the praises. I think we're very, very fair to the Steelers on the website. We tell both sides of the story, critical or not, and that's what's going to happen here. So yes, I have a press pass, and yes, the Steelers, I'm sure, are aware of these things. In fact, I know one of their employees who works in the PR department texts me and knows what I'm doing. So that person may or may not like this comment. But the Steelers, and that involves the public relations staff, that involves the communications department, that involves all of them together more than others maybe. The Pittsburgh Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger, of course, himself, Ben Roethlisberger's people, Ben Roethlisberger's social media manager that blocks everybody, they all should have been aware of the optics. They should have at least been aware of the optics and how this could look. Okay, they should have maybe been weary of this, or maybe not publicize the haircut as much, throw it all over social media, knowing those likes are going to come, and knowing that he was holding to a promise that he made almost a year ago now. I get it. Okay, I totally get that Ben Roethlisberger just wanted a freaking haircut. Because again, look at him there. That's a shaggy beard, and I think that's mid-season. We certainly saw it get way crazier to this point. And he needed a trim. He needed a trim bad, maybe more than the average person whose beard has grown wild during quarantine. Ben's was 6, 7, 8 months prior to that, and then a jump start in quarantine. So I get it. Ben needed the haircut. I get he wanted to make a promise, and I get that you knew the fans were going to like it, the media was going to like it, and it was going to be a social media phenomenon, which really, that was part of it. I get it. But the Steelers should have been aware of the optics, and even if Ben wanted to do it, they should have told him, no, man, that's going to be bad optics on us. This is a franchise that normally does it on the up and up, and that's not going to work, especially for what we're going to talk about later with the Rooney Rule. It's called the Rooney Rule because it's off the last name of the family that owns this franchise and has for decades upon decades of tons of success. It's an illustrious franchise in all of pro sports, certainly in the NFL. And the optics aren't going to be good. So Ben's people, if they didn't catch it, and they should have caught it too, and Ben should have known himself, but if Ben didn't catch it, if Ben didn't think of the optics, if Ben's people didn't catch it, and they didn't think of the optics and second-guess these things, the Steelers then themselves should have. However, the governor didn't need to make it into the big deal he's made it. He did not. It just didn't need to be that. And I get people maybe could say the media inflame things, and I'm not going to say that when we talk about things and I do shows like this and we cover it all over all of our different outlets, all over those platforms, which could be different sites and different shows all over the place based on today's media. I get it's going to inflame the fire. I certainly get that. But we can't ignore comments, and critical comments, I might add. They were definitely critical comments. They were for sure critical of Ben Roethlisberger by the governor. We can't ignore when a governor of a state criticizes the future Hall of Fame quarterback of an illustrious franchise. We can't ignore that. We just can't, okay? And I get it didn't go as wild, the situation with Brady down there in Florida and accidentally going in somebody's house and breaking and entering and going in a park when he shouldn't have under quarantine, and that didn't get to be the wildfire despite the Florida governor being aware of that. They kind of put a lid on it. But it's not our fault that when we report something like they did there, then fans run amok with it, or the national media runs amok, or the fans run amok. So I'm not going to blame ourselves being media. We had to cover this story. It had to be covered. What I'm going to say here, and this kind of will wrap it up, I get the optics were bad. I get he wanted to uphold a promise and knew the fans would like it. I get that Ben Roethlisberger himself, Ben Roethlisberger's team of people, and he does have a team of people that handle him and help his PR. He wants the spin to be positive. And if not them, I get the Pittsburgh Steelers should have been aware and should have been more on the up and up and should have said the optics weren't be good, so let's not do this. Ben, his team, and the Steelers should have been more conscious of the optics, okay? They should have known they're not going to be good. But it didn't need to be the gigantic deal it's made into. The governor did not need to really comment on it. He could have said, that was an isolated incident, let's move on to the next one. He didn't need to double down on criticism despite holding that press briefing. He didn't need to go wax poetic on how he's not above anybody else. We get it, it's all been out there. The governor inflamed the fire first. We just covered it. We're just reporting on what's going on in the news of this team by covering it. Okay? So the governor did not need to make a gigantic deal that it became. Now, separate from that asinine news, so we segue from what's asinine to the actual news, and I actually think there's some positive but also negative mixed in here. And that, of course, is what's going on now with the Rooney Rule in the NFL. And this, of course, is a rule that is attached to the Pittsburgh Steelers based on the name, based on the Rooney Rule. It's attached, and it's a rule out there that's been throughout, since its inception, trying to help minorities, mostly African Americans, get head coaching jobs and at least get interviews. And there have many times recently, especially recently, but there have been many times where a team only interviewed somebody of a minority, of an African American descent, just to, try to uphold the Rooney Rule, just so they weren't fined. They knew they were going to hire. They knew it wasn't going to be that guy. And I've argued in the past, well, some hated that, and it's certainly not good. I don't love that by any means. I mean, you should just be hiring the best man for the job regardless of race. That's how I would want it. That's the ideal way things should be. And they're not that way, and they're never going to be that way, and we all know that, unfortunately. But at least having an interview for a job, for an African American having an interview, or for anybody having an interview for a job, even if you don't get it, even if you know you're not going to get it, and they know they're not going to give it to you, it does get your name out there, it does further your chances, and it has probably helped some people. And again, we're sitting here with the Pittsburgh Steelers having an African American head coach who's, we've touched on this on past shows, like it or not, going to get into the Hall of Fame, has been great for the league, has been very successful, and has won a championship. That's big. Okay, and so the Steelers haven't gone against this at all. And when they hired Mike Tomlin, he was an assistant, yes, on a great staff under Tony Dungy and then under John Gruden winning that Super Bowl with the Buccaneers in 2002. But it wasn't like he was coveted by everybody out there or everybody in the world. Certainly the casual fan probably had no idea who Mike Tomlin was prior to him being hired by the Steelers. He wasn't a direct coordinator. He was an under assistant in those regimes in Tampa. So the Steelers were able to promote somebody and see them have success and probably going to get him into the Hall of Fame someday. So that's great. Not every team has done that, and that does suck. I get it. But the number one, I'm going to do the bad before the good here. The number one thing the Rooney Rule conversation brought up recently that they were proposing, at least, was to offer draft compensation, to offer improved draft compensation. And I'm talking about as high as a third-round draft pick. Because I know the minute this came out, this report was out there, I was vehemently against it, and others said, well, it's going to be a late-round pick. It's going to be a 6th or 7th. Yes, every 10 years somebody turns into something, but that's not the end of the world. We got to do something for the Rooney Rule. And I get you kind of got to do something because it does suck when teams are interviewing people for no reason, and it's not upholding the rule truly, even though I do argue it still does help guys indirectly. And I've said time and time again, there's really nothing you can do. I really don't think anything can be done legitimately. You can't force anyone to hire anyone. You can't mandate a franchise or any business out there hire somebody just because you want them to get a job or just because you want them to have so many minorities. I'm not a fan of that. You shouldn't be doing that. That hurts people who are qualified that happen to not be in the minority. It's not their fault. They're in the majority race. And you shouldn't be mandating who anybody hires. It is their business. It is up to the owners. Donald Sterling could do whatever the hell he wanted with the Clippers for all those years until he no longer was the owner. He did something that caused him not to be the owner, but prior to that being the owner, you can't tell him who he can hire and who he cannot. And we all know that there's facts to say he was racist while owning a pro sports team. But I'm not with that reward for two main reasons here, guys. And this is going to fill both people on both ends of the spectrum. Number one is just flat out not fair. It's ridiculous. It's asinine, as the word I used earlier for that segment. And that I love to use because it certainly fits. It fits many topics out there in sports these days and really in the news in general. It's asinine to award somebody draft compensation as high as a third rounder, which is way higher of a percentage of somebody who can get something done for you. James Conner was a third rounder. There's players the Steelers have drafted recently that have produced for them that have been third rounders and above. That's insane. That's a productive player who could potentially play well for you next season. It's not a slam dunk first rounder, and not all first rounders are even slam dunks, but a third round is majorly different than a 6th or 7th round in terms of what you expect out of them within the first few years of drafting them. And the reason why you maybe did draft them. And a third round pick's just crazy. You're basically creating a situation where you're going to impact the competitive advantage of the game just because someone hires someone. So I saw a tweet out there, a joke from a colleague, and it was funny. You should almost do this, maybe like George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin. The Steelers should just fire Mike Tomlin and then rehire him again and then get that third-round draft compensation. Let it linger a little bit in the offseason. But in all seriousness, you're going to have teams that have a white head coach that's been wildly successful, say the greatest franchise around right now, the New England Patriots and Bill Belichick. They're not going to fire him, obviously. So that team's going to be almost penalized, and you're going to have a rival of theirs potentially elevate over them, especially now without Brady, where they're in a little bit of a rebuild, because that team potentially hired an African-American head coach. The Patriots aren't going to fire their white guy. There's a lot of white head coaches that are successful right now. It's not their fault. They're white. They do deserve the job. They worked up for the job, and they're having success in deserving their job. Now, of course, there's been white head coaches in the past that didn't deserve to linger around as long as they did. Say Jeff Fisher, who was always 500 or worse, or at least for a long period of time. 8-9 straight years of being 500 or worse, being under 500 really, certainly could have cost him his job well before he was eventually fired. I get it. I put rant, search my name and Jeff Fisher on Twitter, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But I will say that one second, guys. All right, the home studio situation there creates some different kinks there. I thought somebody was going to come in the middle of the show. But regardless, back to where it was. Yes, there have been white head coaches that lingered around too long. There's also been black head coaches that lingered around too long. Marvin Lewis was there for, a decade and a half? Didn't win a playoff game? Had some down, bad years. Yes, he resurrected that franchise, but he should have been fired long before he was. And I wish there was more minority head coaches. There certainly are more qualified. I wish there was more minority executives. There certainly are more qualified. They certainly should get opportunities. No one's saying any of that. But to award a team a benefit of compensation that could affect on the field, just unfair, based on who they hire. Okay, that's just insane. There's no way around that I'm going to ever support that. That is just insane. And fortunately, the NFL owners, or at least enough of them, decided to table it. Now, they didn't decline it altogether, which I would love, but they tabled the idea, which means they're going to go back to the drawing board, probably try to rework things. I don't know if that means they're going to go from a third to a seventh, which I would still not like, but it would at least be better. But regardless, they at least table the issue. So that's a positive because that's not going to happen right now. And again, that was just insane. You're going to award somebody something that could actually affect the competitive play on the field for just hiring somebody. Teams are going to we know what that's also going to do. That's going to create a scenario where teams are going to actually favor hiring minority head coaches. And I get it's been the reverse in the past, but it's going to create a scenario where teams are going to hire a minority as a tiebreaker scenario between that guy and maybe a white guy they feel like both maybe deserve the job. They're going to hire the minority because he also comes with a third-round draft pick. Okay? And I get maybe that's the point of this. They want to swing it in that direction because it's been the other way. They want to swing the pendulum. But let me put you this way. And I've seen this out there, and this makes sense. So people saying, I get all that competitive advantage, but we got to do something. These people are racist. We got to have the minorities in there. I'm with you. There certainly are some racist owners out there in pro sports. We've seen it. I want more minority hired. I'm not racist at all. However, I don't believe it's fair to add a competitive advantage in there. And second of all, do you really only, it's demeaning to minorities, to African American. Do you really only want to get a job because somebody gets a reward or you dangle a carrot in front of them? Or do you even want to win a tiebreaker if you're qualified and you feel like you deserve it regardless? Do you really want to win a tiebreaker just because somebody gets a reward for hiring you? That demeans your qualifications. That demeans you being worthy of the job. And really, that sets a horrible precedent. A white person, a black person, whoever should get a job because they're the best candidate. And that's maybe a utopia that doesn't exist, and that perfect world doesn't exist right now because some people do think differently than you or I, and unfortunately some people are racist out there. But adding a competitive advantage, that's just not fair. That just sucks. It shouldn't affect the on-field play on who gets hired. You can't force anyone to hire somebody. There are moves in the positive direction based on somebody getting an interview, even if they're not going to get hired for a job. I'm not sure what else can be done, but at least happy they're tabling that part of the issue. Now, the other part of the issue, which, again, this was progressive, and I do actually like this. I think this was major. Put it up there before, but here it is again. We have it on SteelersNow.com, of course. The NFL expands Rooney Rule to include coordinators, executives, and what that really trickles down to, if you read the article, they're no longer going to have scenarios where assistants, where any subordinate, a coordinator, anyone lower than the head coach, really anyone at all in terms of a coach, is no longer going to be blocked from being sought after by another team. There's not going to be a period of time where a team can block that situation. There's not going to be a situation where a team has to ask permission to interview somebody or talk to somebody when they're with another team, say a rival or just really anybody in general. Those blocks and that restrictions, they're gone now. That has been passed. And what they're going to do there, it's not just for African Americans or minorities, although it certainly will help them, is number one, if somebody's in a place where they feel like they're never going to move up in, it'll help them get out if somebody else covets them and feels they're worthy. If somebody just wants another job because they want to move their life somewhere else, it'll help them be able to do so. If somebody wants to move up the ladder from, say, a low-level assistant to a coordinator position if they're not going to get a head coach job, that's more money. It's a better standing in the NFL as a coach. It'll help them. It'll make that possible, and it'll move that faster for them. That's great. You should be able to better your life and go where you want and work where you want. I get sometimes there has to be rules, and I get maybe you don't want to have college players going from team to team, and especially in conference and feeling like they're trying to needle you, but coaches do it all the time, and that's a conversation for another day. But the point of it is, that's a positive of all of this. But what I'm going to say here, I'm going to close this chapter here, as I believe I'm going to be interrupted here in a second here again if I don't. Want to make sure you follow us on social. PGH Steelers Now on Twitter, Steelers Now over there on Facebook, Pittsburgh Sports Live on Twitter and Facebook. PGH Sports Live is the Twitter handle. Make sure you hit us up, pghsportslive.com, as well as SteelersNow.com. You can find me there at Mike Asti 11, and find all of us throughout the Now networks there in the entire family. For next time, and maybe another Steelers live chat sometime soon, but regardless, whether you live chat or not, I can go on rants that can make this into a monologue to use in infamy, but had to get those hot takes out there on the asinine, but also legitimate positive news in the world of the Pittsburgh Steelers recently.